Bill Allison is our speaker. He's a very modest gentleman, and he doesn't like to be introduced as I wish to introduce him. So I'm going to take the opportunity to do that before he arrives, so that he won't get on to me later. Bill comes from an old Southern family, African-American family. His father was a very distinguished gentleman. They were from, let me get back to Bill himself. He has a twin brother who passed away. He was handicapped and passed away several years ago. But he has several siblings still living, and Bill himself served as vice president for Coca-Cola, one of the vice presidents of Coca-Cola for many years. He was appointed by President Carter to serve during his administration in the field of human rights, which he did for about 6 years. Bill also, when he learned of the Baha'i Faith as a youngster, he was determined to go pioneering. So pioneering means that you travel to another country, get a job, earn your own living, usually if it's possible to do that, and teach the Baha'i Faith to the people as one of them. Bill did this in the Philippines. He went as a youngster to one of the remote islands in the Philippines and lived among the people and kept up with those people for the rest of his life. He's still in touch with some of those folks now in his 9th decade of life. So he's a very interesting man, a world traveler, and has looked at life from many different angles, and I think you will enjoy meeting him. I'm going to stand out in the foyer to wait for him. Bill Allison.
I forgot. Oh, there you go.
Thank you so much. Halashima Shataras.
Merci.
Well, my apologies for being so tardy, but the route that we took, I hadn't taken a long time. And when I looked on MapQuest the other day, in anticipation of the trip, they said it would take an hour and a half. And so I actually gave myself an hour, assuming that this was Sunday and it was Thursday. But Baha'u'llah was so kind and gracious that first, my dear brother Ashburn Searcy called me, maybe it was a couple of months ago, and asked if I would come and give a talk on the faith. And I hesitated because I talk about the Baha'i Faith all the time. I'm very comfortable doing that. But generally it's when I'm walking the Beltline and I meet someone, a fellow traveler, and pick up a conversation. And ultimately, in that course of that walk, we talk about everything, which means we ultimately talk about religion and God. So it's very easy. But then when, as said, this was a group that was an interfaith group. And I said, well, that's a pretty powerful group. And fortunately, in the Atlanta Baha'i community, I have served as a representative to our own, it's called the Faith Alliance of Metropolitan Atlanta. So there you have Jewish, Hindu, Christian members. So I feel very comfortable speaking to you today. And I hope you forgive me for being a little out of breath, but I'll do the best I can. I'm so fortunate, my dear nephew, because I was so unfamiliar with the route. I've been here before, but it's been a while. I called John Haynes to get help, and the last time I saw John, he was visiting his home, and that was not the same direction. So, but I thought I would take Uber. You know about Uber. And I thought what I would do, it was Saturday, I would call them and arrange Uber to pick me up on Sunday. But you do it on the same day. You don't do it ahead of time. And he's younger and much more knowledgeable. And so I called Daryl. His name is Daryl Harris. He's my late sister's one of 3 sons that she had. And he said, "Not to worry, Uncle. We're planning on coming. Ramona and Daryl are planning on coming." So here we are. You've had prayers, so you've had the benefit of a in which that is possible. He says, "O Son of Man, I love thy creation, hence I created thee. Wherefore do thou love me, that I may name thy name and fill thy soul with the spirit of life." He says, "To every discerning and illuminated heart, it is evident that God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immensely exalted beyond every human attribute, such as corporeal existence, ascent and descent, egress and regress. Far be it from his glory that human tongue should adequately recount his praise, or that human heart comprehends his fathomless mystery. He is and hath ever been veiled in the ancient eternity of his essence." So how do we know him? How do we know this entity, this unknowable essence? We know him through these messengers who have come to us over time. And Baha'is believe that the most recent of these is Baha'u'llah. Not unlike Christianity, where John the Baptist foretold the coming of Christ, in the Baha'i Faith, we have a twin dispensation. Prior to Baha'u'llah making his announcement in 1863 in Baghdad, there was a young man who had this experience that we discussed earlier, extra-normal, phenomenal experience. We know him by the title, the Bab. He was the gate. And his purpose was essentially to say to the world at that time that I'm here for one purpose alone, and that is to prepare you, to open your way, or to open the way for one far greater than myself. And once he made that announcement, he was confronted with naysayers and those who didn't believe, and ultimately leading to his martyrdom 6 years later in 1850. But he opened the way. And I had actually meant to bring with me my prayer book, because the prayers of the Bab are very, very special. Those of you who are already Baha'is know that. And I apologize for that. Maybe we have someone with a prayer that we can include with the Bab. But it's interesting. I'm sure each Baha'i has, he or she has his own favorites, but just as an example, thank you, Ash. I was reading only last night. Here's one. I beg thee to forgive me, O my Lord, for every mention but the mention of thee, and for every praise but the praise of thee, and for every delight but delight in thy nearness, and for every pleasure but the pleasure of communion with thee, and for every joy but the joy of thy love and of thy good pleasure, and for all things pertaining unto me, which bear no relationship unto thee. O thou who art the Lord of lords, who provideth the means and unlocketh the doors. So he came, he opened the door for Baha'u'llah. He was martyred in 1850. Baha'u'llah was one of those who accepted him, and then had this experience, not unlike the Bab, in 1863 in the Garden of Baghdad. And Baha'is, those of us who are Baha'is, annually celebrate that occasion. It's a holy day. And of course, once he made the declaration, he found himself, not unlike the Bab, challenged by those who didn't accept. And the result was that he was banished from Baghdad to Adrianople to Constantinople, and finally to the prison city of Akka, where the Baha'i World Center is located. Baha'u'llah ushered in this new world, proclaiming the oneness of mankind, the oneness of God, established very firm principles about the unity of religion and the unity of races, the oneness of mankind, the equality of men and women, the accord between science and religion, education. And he sent these messages to the heads of state at that time to let them all know this had happened. I think one of those who received his message was Queen Victoria. And because she did not out of hand discard it, he prophesied a long, as she ultimately had, a long period. But he passed in 1892. And the Baha'i Faith is distinct in the sense that each of the religions I've mentioned earlier, there was not a clear statement or connection between the prophet and his successor. And we are very fortunate in the sense that Baha'u'llah clearly established that his son Abdu'l-Baha would be the center of the Baha'i Faith, the center of the covenant. And once, even though he was in prison, once the Young Turk Rebellion occurred in 1908, he was free and immediately set upon teaching the faith about his father. Coming to America in 1911, and the first house of worship outside of Asia, the cornerstone was laid in Wilmette, Illinois. And now there are houses of worship in all the continents. And I've had the good fortune to visit several of them. But he provided the framework for the teaching of the faith throughout the world. And at his passing in 1921, he chose his eldest grandson, a young man whose name is Shoghi Effendi. And Shoghi Effendi, at the time of his selection, was a student in Oxford, in Balliol College. Not expecting to be given that responsibility. And so taken aback by it that he had to take off time and go away and then return to take up this tremendous responsibility of teaching the Baha'i Faith. And for 36 years, I'm still overwhelmed by the fact that someone singly and alone had such a responsibility and yet managed to translate the writings of his grandfather and Baha'u'llah, the Bab, so that we could have them, and to establish the World Center so that you and I, those of us who choose to become Baha'is, can visit that site today and marvel in the beauty of the gardens. It's so interesting. People who know nothing of the faith traveling in that part of the world will often see the shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel, because it's so striking as you come into the bay and you look up the mountain. There's this gold structure that it's used in all of the tourist magazines. And Shoghi Effendi immediately began a series of teaching plans, culminating in the World Crusade. And I had the good fortune of my mother in 1957 to do a pilgrimage, to visit the World Center and to meet the Guardian. Just a moment of personal reflection. You might wonder, how did you become a Baha'i? It's not a well-known religion. I'm taking too much time out.
You can finish in 2-3 minutes.
Good. I'm sorry. This is one of the problems when you get into your... But at any rate, one of the early Baha'is was a gentleman whose name was Louis Gregory. He was a black man from South Carolina. My cap, if you see it, has Charleston on it. And he went to school in Nashville, Tennessee at Fisk University, and then to Howard University Law School. And he was one of the early believers, one of the people who accepted Abdu'l-Baha, the Baha'i Faith, meaning Abdu'l-Baha. And once he became a Baha'i, he immediately set out to share the message with others. And so, having been educated in Nashville, he came back to the school, Fisk University. And my father was one of the administrators of that university. And my mother, of course, was there. And she met Mr. Gregory. And I mention this because she was a seeker. She had been brought up in the Methodist Church denomination, but she had already looked into unity and Unitarianism. She was looking for something, given being that she was black in America, looking for something, you know, in this country we often say the most discriminated time of the week is Sunday, when we all had to go to separate churches, black and white churches. So she wanted something that dealt with this fundamental issue of racism. And it's racism in America. It could be class in another culture, it could be religion in another culture, but the fundamental issue was oneness. And it appealed to her, and she became a Baha'i. I know I should stop, but I'm going to make one other comment, because it's something that I had experienced. While we were on pilgrimage, it was the course of the pilgrimage that we would spend time listening to the Guardian. And one evening, fortunately, I would go back and make notes, so this is something I recorded, because I'm sure I wouldn't remember it. Here it is, this many years later. But one evening, he talked about the evils in our society, primarily racism and materialism. I'll never forget sitting at the end of the table. He was at the head, well, my mother was at the head, he was on her immediate right. And I can remember the movement of his hands, and he said, materialism would be swept away in a matter of seconds. I just made notes of his words. Many years later, September the 11th, 2001,
Yes.
I'm sitting in my doctor's office when this terrible event occurs. My daughter is in New York in MedLife building. She finished law school, was practicing there. And even to this day, that incident, that tragic incident where the towers came tumbling down by virtue of a plane that hit. Even the engineers are still trying to assess how something as dramatic as that could happen. You might say it's coincidental. That's your perfect right. For me, it was and is the fulfillment of the station and the purpose of someone who was the last surviving member of the family of Baha'u'llah. Following his passing in 1957, there was no successor. no family successor. But Baha'u'llah had already established in his laws that there would be an institution called the Universal House of Justice. And so in 1963, that body was created and exists today. As a matter of fact, they are meeting in Haifa as we speak, and they are selecting their members at this time. There will be 9 of them. They meet every 5 years. I was in the Philippines as a pioneer. I stay in touch with the friends there. I was just going to send a text to a friend there. She was on her way to Haifa. Ken Bowers, who is related to our family here, is there. They're now, I promise to stop. My mother and I went to Haifa in 1957 in May. We had the bounty, as it were, to actually be the last believers of the Baha'i Faith to be with the guardian of the Baha'i Faith before Christ. And
Thank you so much.
I apologize.